Welcome to ACN, the Liberation TV of Ambazonia.
Yes, fellow Ambazonians, thank you very much. Thank you very much for being here with us. You have here your son of the soil, your own diplomat. We have another episode of our fantastic regular program, the Diplomatic Valise. And today we are going to have with us a very important guest. Usually we try to make sure that we have people who can come here and they can break down things for the Ambazonian population, especially about diplomacy and the reaction from the international community. So today, this Friday, the 5th of February in 2021, we are going to be talking about the current crisis that we find ourselves in within the last 4 years, the Cameroon crisis that is stemmed by many political leaders and scholars, and some people even term it the Anglophone crisis. We are going to talk about all those things. So today we have with us a very important guest from the Global Center for the Responsibility to Protect in New York, Mrs. Juliette Paauwe. So she's a senior researcher and also analyst for that organization that is working to protect societies and community from mass atrocity crimes. So today we are going to have this guest to talk about the recent developments and the humanitarian impact of this conflict that our people are suffering, and also what can the international community do to make sure that we have a lasting solution for the people of Southern Cameroon? So, Mrs. Juliette Paauwe, you are very much welcome to the Diplomatic Valise. I appreciate that you spare this time to talk to us. And we understand that you guys are very busy, so we thank you for coming here today with us. You're welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I hope everyone can hear me well. It's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you.
Yes, you are one person, or there are many people as well, but you're one of those people that are working on the crisis of Cameroon. You are part of an organization that is very important for humanity in general, the Global Center for the Responsibility to Protect. So I will just give you a time now to introduce yourself maybe properly, more detailedly, and also tell, because not every person who is watching us now, maybe in Southern Cameroon, in Nigeria, or anywhere they are, not everybody is very much informed about what is the Global Center for the Responsibility to Protect. So you can explain that to our viewers and our audience who are watching.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. So yeah, thank you for your kind name, Ms. Juliette, and I'm a senior research analyst at the Global Center for the Responsibility to Protect, and I'm based in New York. So the Global Center was established to promote the responsibility to protect. And I think maybe we can talk about that at length, like what R2P is, how it should be implemented. But just to quickly introduce the norm and the Global Center, the responsibility to protect is an international norm that seeks to ensure that the international community never again stands idly by when atrocity crimes are being committed. And with atrocity crimes, I mean specifically genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and ethnic cleansing. So the Global Center was developed and established to promote the responsibility to protect as an international norm, and to make sure that the international community is responding to crises and is contributing to prevention of those crises. And R2P was emerged in the 1990s when the genocides in Rwanda and the former Yugoslavia happened, because at that time the international community failed to timely respond to those crises, resulting in grave human suffering and a loss of humanity. So there was also this increased understanding in the international community that wars were not necessarily anymore between countries, but now increasingly civilians became the target of armed actors or government forces in countries. So that is when the International Committee on Intervention and State Sovereignty started to develop the responsibility to protect. And it was like emphasize that state sovereignty should come with a responsibility. So state sovereignty is not only about halting external interference from other states, but it means that states have a positive responsibilities towards their own citizens. So yes, in New York, we're focused on the Security Council, and in Geneva, we're focused on the Human Rights Council. But that is maybe like a short introduction to the work that we're doing. So focused on atrocity crimes. And in this context, we are providing in-depth research on atrocity situations where we think that atrocity crimes are being committed, or where we think there is an increased risk of those crimes happening. And we are providing strategies for governments to build capacity to respond and prevent to a situation. So also in this context, since 2016, we are closely monitoring the situation in Cameroon.
Thank you very much for that very lengthy explanation about your organization and the responsibility to protect. And again, it's very often misunderstood, or many, especially within the African community, what is this responsibility to protect? Is it something that was launched by, because some people have the opinion or the thinking that this is a concept from Western countries. What is the history of this? Is it something that African states were involved with the development, the initiation of the idea, or is this a concept that is mostly promoted and used by Western countries? Because there's this dilemma when Africans are talking about the responsibility to protect.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And like R2P, when it was developed by this international committee, it was then brought to the General Assembly in New York, and it was formally adopted in 2005 during the World Summit. And that was the largest gathering of heads of states and government, including African countries, were there. And the concept then was unanimously adopted, and it's included in Article 138 and 139 of the World Summit Outcome Document. So African countries were at that time active in the summit, during the summit, and they also adopted and agreed and committed to this R2P norm. And I think what is important to also notice in the African context is that Article 4H of the African Union Constitution has an article on responding to the atrocity crimes. So Africa has been a great supporter. We have worked closely together with many champions of R2P on the African continent, including Ghana, Botswana. They're longstanding partners of us, and we work closely with them. And I think where this misconception also comes in is that R2P is often associated with the third pillar, military intervention. And I think that is particularly in the African context, of course, like a sensitive issue with the context of colonialism. But R2P is so much more than only pillar 3 military intervention. Like R2P is mainly about preventing atrocities. And we always talk about the 3 pillars. Pillar 1 is that every government has a responsibility to protect its own populations from atrocity crimes. And pillar 2 is that the international community should encourage and assist states in meeting that responsibility. And pillar 3 is, yes, if a country is manifestly failing at upholding its responsibility to protect, then the international community should be ready to take appropriate action in a timely and decisive manner in accordance with the UN Charter. So any military force that is being authorized always has to go through the UN Security Council and has to be authorized by the Security Council. So any humanitarian intervention, unilateral military action on the African continent is illegal under international law. And I think we should focus on those aspects of R2P, and I'm happy that we have the time today to elaborate on that, is how atrocities can be prevented, that pillar 3 and military intervention is not necessary. And I think that is important to notice here, and I'm happy to expand on that later if you want to.
Definitely. There are many questions coming on from what you are explaining to us. But I just want us to go in kind of a progressive nature with this conversation here online. So this is going to lead us to the main subject of this interview, the crisis in Cameroon. I have here with me a list of international response that we already have so far related to this crisis. But I just want to ask you that, can you evaluate and analyze to us what is the current situation in Cameroon?
Sure. As I just briefly introduced, like the Global Center looks at situations from this atrocity angle. So we're not necessarily looking to all human rights violations happening, but particularly tailored towards like genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, of ethnic cleansing. So in this context, we have started monitoring the situation in Cameroon closely since late 2016, when the protests erupted of Anglophone students, teachers, and lawyers against their marginalization and underrepresentation in the Francophone government. And so when we look at atrocities, we look at those risks of atrocity crimes and how they are escalating and how we can then intervene to stop it from escalating. So what we see in the Northwest and Southwest regions through this atrocity lens, we see that there are widespread abuses against the civilian population because of the conflict between government forces and armed separatist groups. So security forces of the Cameroonian government have consistently perpetrated extrajudicial killings, burned and looted Anglophone villages, subjected individuals that are alleged ties to separatist movements. They have been subjected to ill treatment and torture. And we also witnessed that armed separatist forces are perpetrating abuses, including killing and kidnapping of civilians. So according to the numbers, since 2016, we noticed that more than 3,000 people have been killed as a result of the conflict. The UN Office for Coordination and Humanitarian Affairs currently estimate that more than 705,000 people are internally displaced in the Northwest and Southwest regions, and that more than 61,000 people have crossed the border with Nigeria. And what I also think is important to notice in this context, because in the international community and in New York, where we are based, the conflict is often misunderstood as, or just like simply put aside as an internal uprising against a government, like a civil war, but there's so much more to it that is important for the international community to know, is that there's a huge impact on civilian populations, especially a huge humanitarian crisis now unfolding, and I'm happy to talk about that more. But the environment to deliver humanitarian assistance has become increasingly difficult because of the crisis and the conflict between government forces and armed groups, that civilians are continuously bearing the brunt of this. And that is why the Global Center, because we are mandated to promote and advocate for those populations that are at risk of atrocity crimes. And that is why Cameroon is like high on our agenda as one of the country situations that we work on. We think that there is a current crisis and an increased risk and imminent risk of atrocity crimes there.
Yes, and I think that also there was, like, was it yesterday, a recent report from the Human Rights Watch in Cameroon. There was detailed explanations of the situation also, and the recent killings in Mautu and many massacres in Gabo and other places. And also we are very much aware and following the works of the Global Center where you're working. And your recent report on the 15th of January about the situation in Cameroon also tells a lot about this story. So the thing now is, like, you talk about prevention of mass atrocity crimes. What should the international community do at this stage to proceed in finding a lasting solutions for all those refugees and all those suffering that you mentioned? The numbers are just staggering every day. What can the international community do to find a lasting solution for this conflict, taking into account the historical context of it? There's a lot to talk about when you mention this crisis of Cameroon. Even the appellation of Anglophones is usually disputed among these communities themselves. But taking into account of the historical context, what do you think the international community should do to proceed in finding a lasting solution?
Yeah, that's a good question, and that's something that we deal based almost, because the international community has unfortunately not been able to really exert effective pressure on any of the parties in Cameroon to stop the violence and mediate a resolution to the conflict. And I think what is also important to notice is that often when we talk about the international community, we look at the Security Council. And the Security Council has not acted on Cameroon, but the UN Security Council has not acted on many situations that are currently unfolding. in the past. Like, we're living in a political climate right now where multilateralism is under pressure, human rights law is under pressure, multiple actors are flagrantly violating international humanitarian law, all with impunity. So this is the political context that we are currently operating in, and the UN Security Council is one factor. And yes, the international community, as in the UN Security Council, has failed because there's an internal dynamic of the council that makes it increasingly difficult to respond to situations like Cameroon, but also like Myanmar, Burundi, where governments are actively perpetrating atrocities against their own populations. And it also has failed to even talk about or come up with effective solutions to conflicts that are on the Security Council's agenda for a long time, like the Democratic Republic of the Congo, which continues to escalate, Central African Republic, South Sudan. Like, those country situations are actively being discussed in the Council's context, but are still escalating and still deteriorating. So the Security Council is not like the only actor in the international community that we should look at and we should focus on and we should put all our hopes on, because there are so many more actors in the international arena that can be useful in upholding the responsibility to protect and provide effective changes on the ground. So I think in the context of Cameroon, of course, and that is why the Security Council has also been unable to discuss the situation, is the difficult position of France. France has a long historic relationship, of course, with Cameroon. And I saw your interview with the parliamentarian the other day, which was very interesting. But France doesn't think at this point that the Security Council is the way to go with Cameroon. So they think that bilateral pressure, bilateral engagement is for them more effective to establish change. But it has not resulted in any effective results. And the United States, and with the new administration, would be interesting to see how that develops, because they have been mentioning Cameroon as one of their priorities going forward. So I think that is hopeful as well, because the United States remains a powerful player in the international community, but also is a powerful player in the context of the Security Council and the United Nations. So what I do think what the international community should do is, of course, like, the UN Security Council should meet on Cameroon. It has been silent. It has met in an ARIA formula meeting, which is an informal meeting on the sidelines, not formally on the agenda, on the humanitarian situation. That was in May 2019. And since then, there has not been much follow-up. What also is problematic is that the African countries currently on the Security Council, in particular Kenya, also has no incentive of bringing Cameroon to the council, because they think that, and I do agree to some extent, that the African Union, regional organizations should all step up and put sufficient pressure on the parties to negotiate a solution. And I do think, of course, that regional organizations should play a big role. Like, they're very well placed geographically, they're close to the country, so they have much more influence than others in the international community. However, I also do think that regional action and in multilateral action, for example, Security Council, should not be mutually exclusive. They can go hand in hand. Like, if the international community or if the African Union fails, then the Security Council can back the process up with sanctions or the threat of sanctions. So I think that can all go hand in hand. And what I do think is the most important currently in Cameroon is that there is not sufficient pressure from the international community to the President Paul Biya on creating an environment that is conducive to open and inclusive talks and negotiations. And there's not enough pressure on all the groups involved in Anglophone Cameroon to join that conversation, because what we saw with the previous mediation efforts is that either Paul Biya is not inviting all the groups, so some are already excluded from the beginning, or there are groups that do not want to participate because the government is around the table. And then if not all groups and not all grievances are being addressed, then there will not be a political solution. So I think there needs to be pressure from multiple angles, sustained over time, on all the parties involved to have those negotiations.
Yeah. there's a lot of things that I want to just jump into, but I think I'm just trying to keep a constructive flow of this interview. And the United Nations Security Council is something that we are going to talk about as well. So we have questions for those that are coming later on. You are mentioning the parties involved. I'm just sitting there, I'm thinking, what should the BR regime do right now? What should the international community expect from them to do? Like some analysts are saying that the regime is already suffering from, loss of face, because for 4 years, the Southern Cameroonian resistance forces have been battling the Cameroon army to no avail, because Cameroon regime, Mr. Paauwe, declared war on the people of Southern Cameroon, perhaps hoping that this is a small issue that they are going to crush them within months. But 4 years and still counting, there is no sign of an end. And is this something that the regime is just, ashamed and hiding from loss of face? Like, what should the regime do at this particular moment to find solutions to end this conflict as well? What should the international community expect from the BR's regime at this point?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it is very clear. The evidence shows that the strategy that Paauwe is currently implementing is not working, right? The situation is deteriorating, civilians are suffering, killings continue. And when in 2016, of course, like, it has a much longer history on like self-determination, which is a very difficult issue. But I think for us, like for the Global Center, we started monitoring in 2016 when those protests broke out, because what started as peaceful protests, it was at that time where Paauwe should have taken a more inclusive approach, immediately addressed the underrepresentation, the cultural marginalization of those particular groups. But instead, the peaceful protests were met with violent response. It escalated. There was, he was like totally ignoring any of the grievances that any of the parties had, resulting in a radicalization of Anglophone groups, finally, eventually resulting in the situation where we're in now, which is an armed conflict between armed separatist groups and the regime of Paauwe. So I do think that there needs to be enough pressure on the president. When he launched the national dialogue in October, there was suddenly, like, the international community spoke out in favor of him launching that national dialogue. But he was not. The question is if this was an inclusive dialogue, if this was a fair, transparent, or if it just like something that he wants to do to show the international community that he did something but not really doing something. Because at the same time, all the recommendations that flowed out of that national dialogue have not been implemented. There was this special status that was supposed to be granted to the Southwest, Northwest regions, and many other recommendations that have been largely ignored. So it's not helping. So either there needs to be like more pressure and like more leverage of important partners like the United States, like France, like the Security Council, like the African Union, to ensure that there is a dialogue that addresses all the grief, that gives equal space to all the many voices, because it's not only the armed separatist groups versus the government. There are many, many voices, many grievances, different solutions from different groups, and all these voices need to be given a space and need to be heard and need to be addressed. And I think that that is what Paauwe, as president of the country, is in charge of doing.
Yeah, I think that there is a lot of historical account on this particular crisis. You talk about sovereignty, and I think that one of the arguments of the BR regime is that they are using sovereignty as their license to kill, and they're using sovereignty to say that, okay, we have a policy of non-interference here. And this is the thing, because you mentioned in 2005, during the World Leaders Summit, all the head of state agree. They came together and said, if any state fail to protect their civilian population, then it falls on the United Nations Security Council and the other countries as well to take actions to protect this civilian population. And clearly in Cameroon, we have seen the pattern within 4 years, the killings, the atrocities, and the banality of evil of the BR regime is a type that has been classified even by your own boss himself, that Cameroon is on fire. But here the United Nations Security Council and the international community is not making any statement. But now, this is the thing. Those who are fighting on the ground, leaders like Dr. Abacho Lucas, Sisiko Ayuktabe, who is in prison, and many other Southern Cameroonian leaders who are fighting for what they call their right to self-determination, which is a right that is enshrined in international law and even with the creation of the United Nations itself. So these are very deep issues. What should the international community at the moment also demand? Because we have to look at both parties. There's a Cameroon regime and then the leaders of Southern Cameroon. What should they also do? What steps should they take in a progressive way to find solutions and to meet the international community somehow so that we can find a lasting solution for those civilian population who are caught in between this fighting? Because I also think that they have a responsibility here as well also in seeking solutions. They also have a responsibility as well also in protecting the civilian population as well. It's not only something that we can say it belongs to the regime of Mr. Paauwe, even though according to international law, if they are claiming sovereignty over Southern Cameroons, they legally have the legal responsibility to protect every person under the territories that they are claiming sovereignty over.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely correct. And I do like to bring the discussion also back to R2P and particularly like Pillar 2. Often when we think about the responsibility to protect, we look at the Security Council and their enforcement of military force or authorization of military force. But I do think there's a lot more to unpack what the international community is doing. There are certain steps taken by countries that are never labeled as upholding the responsibility to protect, but are actually ways to uphold the responsibility to protect. Like what countries can do that have good relationships with Cameroon, that are donor nations or regional countries, regional organizations, to uphold their R2P and Pillar 2, the encouragement and assistance to the Cameroonian government is, for example, financial, logistical, and economic assistance. They can deliver development assistance. They can help in capacity building for institutions of the government and programs. They can assist to build capacity of and reform the security sector. And the most important one, I think, in this context is denying the means to commit atrocities. So every player in the international community do have a responsibility to ensure that parties to the conflict in Cameroon are denied the means to commit atrocities. And there are actually examples of how this has been happening. Like, for example, during 2019, the United States cut its military aid to Cameroon because of the human rights abuses that the Cameroonian government and security forces was perpetrating against its populations. And that involved armored vehicles, boats, aircraft maintenance, helicopter training, and partnerships program. And it was a significant amount of money that the United States cuts every year. It's $17 million every year that the United States decided to cut because of the human rights abuses the government was perpetrating. Same as for Germany. So these are all ways in which individual members of the international community can uphold their responsibility to protect by denying actors to the conflict the means to commit atrocities. And in that same context, the United States also cut a trade program in 2019 that allowed Cameroon to sell its products to a duty-free base, which is also an important leverage that the United States can use against the Cameroonian government. Recently, the trade deal with Cameroon and the United Kingdom was being discussed in the Parliament of the UK, and we saw that some parliamentarians asked very tough questions on why the human rights situation was not included or discussed in the context of this new trade deal with Cameroon. And there were also steps taken by the European Union recently adopted a joint motion for a resolution on the human rights situation. We have seen the United States Senate resolution recently also outlining the human rights situation. And last week, I've seen reports that France allegedly refused a visa renewal of 4 ministers of Cameroon, of the Cameroonian government, that were actually involved in the Cameroonian crisis. And one of them, France, has even repeatedly asked Paauwe to remove that person from office. So all these steps are taken, it's not the Security Council that is intervening, but all those steps from individual member states trying to influence the course of action on the ground are ways to uphold the responsibility to protect. So it's not that nothing is happening. There are things happening by some countries, but yeah, there can be so much more, because the situation is still unfolding, deteriorating. with grave consequences. So yeah.
Yeah, that is very good that you just take on the next subject that I was going to talk about, France and their responsibility to protect in the United Nations Security Council. We understand that the UN Security Council was established to be like the global police, if you say that in simple terms. And the members, like the permanent members in the United Nations Security Council, they have a legal obligation. And they also have a moral obligation as well to uphold their responsibility to protect when the time comes. When you look at Cameroon, the crisis in Cameroon, and France, Emmanuel Macron agreed in Paris sometime in 2018 that he is aware of this situation that is going on. And the French ambassador to the United Nations have never raised this issue. And there he raised the question to the people of Southern Cameroon as well, is this another Rwanda we are seeing? Because this is a situation where a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council have acknowledged that they are aware of a crisis that is going towards mass atrocities and genocide, but yet these crises have not been raised at the United Nations Security Council. Is France failing to uphold their own legal duties, not a moral one only, it's a legal duty at the United Nations Security Council when this crisis is concerned?
I would say that, of course, like every individual member of the Security Council has the same responsibility, like whether it's China, whether it's Russia, whether it's France, whether it's the United States. And I think as a body, they fail Cameroon and they fail the Cameroonian populations because of their inaction and their silence. But it's not, I also want to emphasize that it's not particularly like Cameroon that they're failing on. They're failing, like as I mentioned before, failing on so many situations because it has become such a politicized body. And it's not only France that is being difficult on the United Nations Security Council. There are members that do think that the Cameroonian crisis is just an internal matter that should not be within the mandate of the Security Council, because the Security Council mandate is to uphold and maintain international peace and security. They don't think that the crisis in Cameroon warrants their action because it's an internal matter and we should not interfere in domestic affairs. But there are also others that try to include it on the agenda, like the United Kingdom, and some elected members that do think that the UN Security Council needs to discuss it. And France is always of the opinion that bilateral action works better at this point than Security Council action. But even if France would be vocal and would be leading this situation and bring this to the Security Council agenda, they would fail because of the other members on the council, including the African countries, including China and Russia. So I would also suggest to not focus too much on the Security Council, even though that is, of course, and understandably, the organ that the world is looking at. And it's a shame. Like I do agree, because the UN Security Council has so many tools at its disposal that often are not even discussed. Like, for example, of course, if we think about the Security Council in authorizing force and peacekeeping operations or sanctions and arms embargoes, like, yes, those are absolutely great tools that the UN Security Council has at its disposal to influence a course of action. But there is so much more, because the Security Council also has an important role to play in preventing crisis from escalating. So in this context, like preventive diplomacy, mediation, those are all within the mandate of the Security Council. They can, for example, call upon parties to the conflict to settle a dispute by negotiation, by mediation, by arbitration, and they can even recommend appropriate procedures or methods of settlements of those disputes, including mediation. And they have also the power to recommend terms of settlements to parties. So it's not only about sanctions, arms embargoes, troops, sending military troops to a country. It's all about those tools that should be used way more often. They can also do visits to countries. They have done that in the past, of course, pre-COVID. They used to go on trips and talking to different countries and different leaders and governments and parties involved to a conflict. So those are the things that should be used more often by the Security Council. And I do think that every single member on the council has a responsibility to use all those tools that they have, including France.
So if this those members in the Security Councils, they are like saying this crisis as an internal affair of Cameroon. Then it raised the question to many Southern Cameroonians, why then did they take actions to perhaps interfere, like in other places, like in Libya, for example, and other places that they have taken actions to get in? Because also, if you talk about preventive diplomacy and work to prevent genocide and war crimes and atrocity crimes, the Cameroon case, when would that be the time? How many people need to die before these people can see that it is time for the United Nations Security Council to take action, even when they see this crisis as an internal affair of Cameroon? How many people need to die? We're talking about almost 10,000 people have lost their lives, women and children living in the forests, in the bushes. Like, how many more people need to die before it's enough for the UN to take an action to this? Because this is a classic failure to the people of Southern Cameroon by the United Nations Security Council. All the members, I agree with you, everyone that is there on that member. And it's even shocking to us that I think it was in 2019 when Cameroon itself was actually elected to join the United Nations Human Rights Council. That was like the worst thing you can ever think to do, for a country like Cameroon to be elected to join such a noble place when their own record of human rights is below the belt. So these things are very troubling, and we see a crisis that is escalating as the time is going. What are some of the concrete actions? Because even the United States Senate mentioned exclusively France. We know the history of France with Cameroon and their colonies in Africa. It's a long story to talk about. We don't want to go there. But what can the United Nations, what are the actions they can take, the Security Council, concrete actions that can force Cameroon to stop their killings and to come on the table for some kind of a negotiation with the people of Southern Cameroon? What are the examples? You mentioned the tools. What are some of the tools that they can use that they are not using?
So I think, to start with, also the Secretary General of the United Nations has an important role to play. He is having the opportunity to do like good offices, which often are behind the scenes, of course, like tough conversations with, for example, President Paauwe on like the human rights situations. And those should be used more, the good offices of the Secretary General. And I think also the Secretary General can bring a matter to the attention to the Security Council if he thinks that that is necessary. So I also think that the Secretary General has a role to play in bringing the situation of Cameroon to the Security Council, to put that extra pressure on the Security Council to discuss that situation. What I do think is that the UN Security Council, of course, needs to discuss it. Like, we can repeat that many times, but the Security Council needs to uphold that. But what I think also in relation to Rwanda, to Libya, the international community is unfortunately built upon member states and state sovereignty. And that's a very difficult operational context. And it's increasingly difficult in the time that we're living at now. We see it with the United Nations Security Council. We see it with the International Criminal Court, for example, and I hope we can discuss justice later, where those institutions are built by states for states, with clear international and national. So what I try to say is that it is difficult to get parts moving in that system when it's all about protecting sovereignty. And we were shifting back. I feel like, personally, I think we're shifting back to pre-2005, pre-R2P, where sovereignty becomes more important than what is actually happening. So yeah, if you think about concrete action that the international community can take, I think we should move away from the Security Council. I think every individual state that has ties with Cameroon, like either trade, financially, economically, military, like all should review those partnership agreements to like exert pressure on President Paauwe to finally create that environment conducive to a political solution and stop pursuing a military solution to the conflict.
I think that one of my last question on this same subject before we move forward is, you mentioned many countries, United Nations Security Council. I was also thinking, what can your organization, what are the things that you people can do as an organization as well to perhaps contribute to finding a solution to end this conflict? Because I think that your organization also have some tools that they can use to facilitate some kind of a process that can lead to something. And I understand also that you guys have done a lot. You have made a lot of reports, and your boss, Dr. Simon Adams, has been very vocal himself about Cameroon on his Twitter account, and also when he goes on interviews. But is that enough?
It's definitely important, right? Because what I noticed with my engagement with diplomatic missions here in New York, but also in Geneva around the Human Rights Council, is that there's still, unfortunately, a lack of understanding of the situation in Cameroon. It's often portrayed as just a civil war between an armed uprising in the southwest and northwest versus the government. But as I explained earlier, it has so much more than only that. And it's a complex situation. It's a humanitarian complex situation. It's a human rights situation. It's a political situation with a huge impact also on the region of where Cameroon is located. So what we can do is educate the international community of what is actually going on. So that's what we're trying first with our in-depth research on the situation, applying that atrocity lens, making sure that international community does understand that we don't want another Rwanda, we don't want another genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, ethnic cleansing happening. We need to take measures to prevent that. So that starts with in-depth research and offering solutions and capacity building strategies to member states. So also like sharing the best practice, like Germany, the United States, cutting military programs. I think those are the ones that also need to be highlighted when we're talking to member states on how they can individually have an impact on the situation by reviewing their trade deals, their military programs with Cameroon. And then, of course, what you mentioned with the Human Rights Council, it's, of course, crazy that a country like Cameroon can serve on the Human Rights Council when the track record of its own human rights violations is not great. So we are also actively doing advocacy around elections on Human Rights Council when we think there is a country trying to get on the council that has a track record of human rights violations to avoid that from happening. So as an NGO, standing on the sidelines, like we don't have the powers that nation states have. We just try to be vocal, try to raise alarm. We also partner up with other organizations where we work with in either New York or in Geneva with humanitarian organizations, with organizations like Human Rights Watch, who has great reporting, which you already referred to earlier. So we partner with them. We're making sure that we have our joint forces exerting influence on those parties. But yeah, more than that, we can do. We just, as an NGO, we just have to be vocal. We have to educate the people of what's going on and making sure that that commitment that they made in 2005 is actually translated into effective action. And that's difficult, but that's within our mandate, and we continue to do that.
Yes, I think that those who are watching us, and mostly our refugees in Nigeria and those in Ghana, and those who have lost their loved ones, children, husbands, sons, they are hoping that those fine words and sweet words and the research can actually manifest into concrete actions that can put an end to this conflict, and so that their life can go back to normalcy. We are going to move on to talk about justice and accountability and even mediation, international mediation. There are those within the Cameroon government who are going around with the slogan of "Let us have peace, let us move on," and they are trying to use all kinds of means to impose some kind of a forced peace without proper reconciliation and justice. What do you think would happen, taking into account all the killings, villages burned, the rapes, everything that has happened in Cameroon, the accountability process? Do we see a time where people within the Cameroon government will be going to places like international court? Because somehow there should be justice and accountability at the end of the day.
Yeah, and you mentioned that peace versus justice, right? Like often peace and stability and security is preferred over justice. Like let us have peace, then, like leave justice away because peace is more important. But I do think that without justice, there can be no sustained peace. Like justice needs always be part of any process of moving forward, especially in the context of atrocity crimes. And each state has also the primary responsibility to investigate and prosecute possible perpetrators of atrocity crimes. And a fair and inclusive transitional justice process can help prevent relapse into further violence and crime. So that's absolutely important, particularly in the case of Cameroon. And transitional justice initiatives can encompass like judicial and non-judicial mechanisms. So it's not only about criminal investigations and prosecutions, but it can also be about reparations, truth-seeking, institutional and legal reform, and ensuring access to justice. So all of that package is important for Cameroon to go forward, because also addressing the grievances and violations can help restore the dignity of the victims and enable reconciliation. And I think that, in my opinion, like domestic investigations are always preferable. Like the Cameroonian government should first and foremost take that responsibility of investigate and prosecute any perpetrators of any of the atrocity crimes committed, because they are closer access to the area. They have easier like opportunities to gather the evidence. There are close proximity of victims. Those are all very important. But of course, like it remains to be seen whether Cameroon is able and willing to have those investigations into the massacres that you've mentioned and the many more that have happened over the past years, because all those investigations need to be fair and don't need to cannot shield anyone from cannot shield any alleged perpetrators. So I think what I want to mention here is also the Nagarbu massacre, which is important to mention, because I do think that first, of course, the government denied any responsibility and any involvement in this massacre. But when they started to investigate this particular massacre, they turned around and they said, like, yes, we were responsible. And they actually identified a couple of perpetrators who were responsible for that. And I also noticed myself a change in the international community right now, where the Kumba and the Mautu massacres happened, that there were several important calls from the international community, including even the Secretary General, on providing justice and investigations and accountabilities to those massacres. And when we talk about international peace and security, we often look to the Security Council. When we talk about international justice, we automatically look at the International Criminal Court. But given the political climate that we're in, like these big intergovernmental organizations have operational limitations. And I don't want to talk at length about ICC and whether or not they will eventually end up prosecuting perpetrators of Cameroon, because of course, Cameroon is not a party to the ICC. The Security Council is not likely to refer that situation to the International Criminal Court. So at that point, I do think that the International Criminal Court's options to investigate Cameroon are limited at this time. But as I said, moving on beyond the Security Council, I think we also should move beyond the International Criminal Court when we look at justice. And I do think here that I have something positive to say also for the people in Cameroon, is that we have seen so many action now in the international community, innovative ways of establishing justice and accountability for atrocity crimes. Because where, for example, in Myanmar, I'm pretty sure that the Myanmar military always thought that they had the protections of China in the Security Council. They were not a member of the ICC, so I'm sure that they were fully aware that nobody would ever prosecute them. But there's this member state called Gambia, who actually launched an historic lawsuit against Myanmar for violating the Genocide Convention at the International Court of Justice. And this was a very important move, because Gambia is far, on the world map, it's far from Myanmar. They're no border country, but they really thought that, okay, what Myanmar's government is doing and the military is doing against the Rohingya minority is absolutely not done, and we're going to sue them for their violating the Genocide Convention. So all these things, and what we've also seen is significant advances with regard to the principle of universal jurisdiction. So this means that any state can try anyone who, they don't have to be their national, their victims don't need to be on their territory, the perpetrators don't have to be on their territory, but just for the gravity of the crime, they can try anyone who they want. And there are currently 16 states in the world that have launched trials under universal jurisdictions, particularly in the context of Syria. So where Syrian generals may thought that they always had the protection of Russia and the Security Council and that they could safely, with impunity, commit crimes, they're now suddenly the subject of important trials in a country like Germany. And I think that that is an important signal. And last year also justice started to catch up with perpetrators of atrocities committed like decades ago when a Rwandan national was arrested by France. And he was one of the most wanted fugitives of the Rwandan genocide. And also we see that mechanisms are established through the General Assembly. So they're avoiding and circumventing, again, the Security Council and becoming innovative. So member states took the initiative to establish the international investigative mechanisms for Syria. And also we see that in the Human Rights Council context, the fact-finding missions, the commissions of inquiry that are established are increasingly innovative in their mandates, in that they also include a mandate to preserve and collect evidence of atrocity crimes that can then eventually be used in any court of justice in future cases. So I can talk at length about it, but I think these developments should all signal to all the perpetrators in Cameroon that they cannot rely upon the permanence of impunity, regardless of how powerful they maybe currently seem, regardless of the protections that they currently receive of those international players in the international arena, because there's now enough international practice showing that justice will eventually catch up and perpetrators will be held accountable.
On that note, I really think that I will close this chapter. The justice and those who are committing crimes within the community of Southern Cameroons will be held accountable. The Cameroon government is going to face justice someday. We hope for that, hopefully. And we have less than 10 minutes more to go. I just want us to talk about international mediation. Recently, we saw the envoy from the Vatican was in Cameroon. And recently also, we heard statement from the newly appointed United States Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, talking about how they are going to take the Cameroon crisis very seriously. And also we saw during the confirmation hearing of the United States, also the ambassador to the United Nations, and there again, the crisis in Cameroon was raised. So we know of the so-called national dialogue that Mr. Paauwe organized some time ago, which was a political charade that never yielded to nothing. We also heard of the so-called special status. I don't know what that means anyway. So that the people of Southern Cameroons are looking for an international platform that every party can come on board and express their wish and their vision as to what is needed to be done to find lasting peace, lasting solution. We don't want a situation where we are going to wrap up some kind of window dressing solution, and then after 2-3 years, we are back again with the same problem. So when we are talking about international mediation, what kind of mediation do you think is needed to finally put this crisis to a lasting solution?
Yeah, as I mentioned before.
Sorry. Swiss as well at one point. Sorry. There was the Swiss at one point with something. They were doing some mediation process, and now the Catholic Church is trying to come on board. And we know of the new American administration. What should we expect from that new administration? What should we expect at this moment from the international community? As to what kind of mediation is like. Will be capable to find a solution, because it is very clear that the Cameroon government cannot find a solution for this conflict. It is very clear that the Cameroon government cannot even investigate their own crimes. We need a third party.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. There needs to be a third party, a neutral party that is stepping up their game and force every party to join the conversation and to join this dialogue. Like someone needs to take over. Like Paauwe has been given the opportunity to try, and like the process was flawed. I think it failed. It's difficult to revive that. Same for the Swiss-led process, which was. It's good when there are those kind of states like stepping up and trying to work on a solution. But I do think that what is lacking is the pressure on all the parties. because as soon as a national dialogue is launched, we're applauding Paul Biya for launching the dialogue, but there's no pressure on like actually like following up, making sure that the process is transparent, that it's inclusive, that all the parties are being included. But also there's a responsibility on all the groups in the Anglophone regions to actually join those dialogues, because I have heard many voices saying that they don't even want to join any dialogue with the government, which is making it very hard. Like if you don't want to join the negotiation table, then how are you expected to negotiate a solution to this conflict? There is no military solution to the conflict. All parties to the conflict needs to be aware of that there's no military solution. The only way forward is a political solution, addressing all the grievances from all the different parties, all the different groups that are present in South and Northwest Cameroon. And yeah, what you said, like there needs to be a powerful country that has that leverage and that can put the sufficient pressure that negotiations is happening. I'm having high hopes of the United States. There's a new administration. They already mentioned that countries, for example, Cameroon, but also the Tigray region in Ethiopia will be high on their list, and they want to be more engaged on that. In my initial conversations with the United States is that they first want to transition, they're still of course they have to clean up the mess that President Trump left behind. So there's a lot to make up for them as well. And it takes some time for the new administration to come in and fully align all their new priorities. And that will then hopefully eventually trickle down into all the institutions like the Security Council, but also bilaterally, that the United States will become that powerful state and influential state that can pressure President Biya, but also pressure all the groups in Cameroon to join that conversation, because that's the only way forward, to give equal space to all the voices that are trying to find a solution and to stop pursuing a military solution to the conflict.
I think that this is very fantastic. Thank you very much for your time. And we are at the end of this conversation. I think we have covered everything that we had in mind to talk about. And now we talked about the mediation possibilities and the process of justice and going back to peace. But I just want to mention that those leaders that are expected to be part of any political process cannot go into a process in Cameroon when they are declared wanted. They are declared as a terrorist. So first of all, people have the fear of their life, because we have leaders who are in incommunicado detention in Cameroon, and you don't expect others as well to join them, blindly flying to Cameroon to discuss in a mediation that your right to life is not protected. And as well, also, the scope of this mediation is one thing that we need to talk about, because most of the people of Southern Cameroon are saying that the form of the state is where their grievances lies. That for the Cameroon is about decentralization, and to Cameroon they are trying to make this as a language problem or as a cultural problem, because this problem is not that of marginalization. We are talking about the historical context of the former British Southern Cameroon, a state that was a trustee territory of the United Nations, and they were a trustee territory because they were destined for self-determination or to become an independent state. And there are even United Nations resolution like that we know so well in April 21st, resolution 1608, that the United Nations actually voted and passed a resolution to grant the state of Southern Cameroon's independence. And that has never happened up to today. So when we're talking about mediation, what should be the scope of that mediation? Are we talking about a mediation for political parties? Because we think that this is not about political parties fighting. We're talking about the soul of the so-called country, Cameroon. The form of the state is a problem here. Do you think we can have that on the table?
No, I agree that it should include way more voices than only the government and other political groups. I think important what you said, given the whole history of self-determination, I think every single person in Southern Cameroons have to be included in the process, like women organizations, youth organizations, everyone who wants to pursue a solution to this conflict need to be given the space to talk about their grievances and how they would like to see the situation moving forward. I think that Sorry?
Can we see, like you're talking about, like something like a referendum? Can the United Nations call for a referendum to see, because the will of the people at the end is the route to the solution?
Yeah, I'm not sure about referendums. Unfortunately, I'm not an expert on that. But yeah, I do think that there needs to be a solution, right? Like we cannot like pursue this conflict for years and years and years. But I'm also not like the solution should be for the Cameroonians themselves. Like it's not for the UN to decide. It's not for me of the Global Center to decide what solution is best and what works for the Cameroonians. It needs to be a process led by Cameroonians, but supported by what you said, like because of they're labeled as terrorists, like those armed groups, a neutral party on neutral territory. That needs to be the location of the future negotiations. Plus, like the scope needs to be as broad as possible. Like all different voices, women, men, children, youth. Like they all need to be included in those conversations. So yeah, like at some point, I hope that the political inaction becomes too high, that influential member states will step up and say, this is enough, enough is enough. We have a responsibility to protect all vulnerable populations. Now you need to have those negotiations happening.
Thank you very much. And we are going to wrap up this interview. And our guest, there you have it, our guest from the Global Center for the Responsibility to Protect in New York. Juliette, thank you very much for your time. I know you guys are very busy. We sincerely appreciate that you came here today and talk with us. And we hope that in the future we can continue on this conversation some other time. And we are following closely your work that you are doing with the organization. And we are looking forward to how this is going to progress. And we hope that as soon as possible, our people can have peace and life can go back to normalcy in Southern Cameroon. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me, and pleasure to do this again. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Bye. Yes, fellow Ambazonians, that was the interview with the senior researcher from the Global Center for the Responsibility to Protect in New York. This is another interview again where we have a very important guest coming from a very big organization, and they keep telling Ambazonians the same things, that we must fight. We are the ones to free ourselves. The international community is busy doing other things, but we are the number one shareholder. We are the number one investors. We are the people that are going to free Southern Cameroons. Don't wait for the UN. The UN is coming late after we have been killed and massacred. We have to stand up and defend ourselves. You heard it very clear and loud. The people of Southern Cameroons, we have to stand up. Self-defense, gun-boot diplomacy. We have the right, we have the legal right to defend our right to self-determination. We have the legal right as well, Southern Cameroonians, to fight and protect our right to life. And that is our only obligation right now. We must focus onto that. And we can also see also that justice is going to come on. Justice will be served because the international community is following up very closely with the crisis in Cameroon. And very soon, justice is going to catch up with the Mr. Paauwe's regime. There's no way the Cameroon government is going to run away from justice. And justice will be first before peace. There will be no peace without justice. And you also heard from the guest, a very educated person in the field of international law, international relation, and she was saying that when we're talking about mediation, it's supposed to be an international mediation with a third party, a party that have the political leverage to push and bring Cameroon to the table and to make sure that everything that is discussed and agreed will be implemented. We also hear from our guest, she was saying that this form of the state is a must to be on, and even more than that, need to be on the table when we are talking about mediation for this crisis to come to an end. We also heard from our guest, she said that sadly the Swiss process failed, and it failed because all the parties were not there, and the process was lacking the political strength to bring Mr. Paauwe on the table. So now it is up to you, Ambazonians. It is up to you and I to put our contribution, support the self-defense group. We have to back our soldiers on the ground to make sure that we fight and push Mr. Paauwe. We need to be strong, because if we are not capable, the international community will never come to save Ambazonians. And this is the same message that continues to repeat itself. And that is why I always endorse and I have come forward to Ambazonians. We must go forward with this struggle only with gun boot diplomacy. When the guns are speaking in ground zero, the international community is going to respond. And that is what we need to do. Stop the politics. Forget about the politics. And this is where we call all the people of Southern Cameroons. The women have to be included. You heard from our guests that we need the inclusion of the women voices in this struggle. The women have to be included. The young people of Southern Cameroons, the youth of Ambazonians. We need the Ambazonian youth to also step up their game, get involved, because we must fight collectively. This is a fight for all the people of Southern Cameroon. This is not a fight to free one person. We are fighting to liberate 8 million Ambazonians. And there we need a collective action. And this is where we are also calling our soldiers on the ground for a collaboration possibility. We want our soldiers to cooperate so we can minimize the losses on our side. We can minimize the cost of this war on Ambazonians. And we can strategize and make sure we make more efficient move, effective move to bring down our enemy as fast as possible. But again, this year, 2021, is very, very pregnant for Ambazonians. We are hoping, like you heard from our guests, that we are having high hopes on the American new regime, and they have a lot of contact with them. They have been working with them already, so they very much know them. We are hoping that the new American regime is going to be more engaged, and the international community will force something and push Cameroon to come for an inclusive dialogue. But Ambazonians must understand, do not be deceived. Don't let yourself to be deceived that the Catholic Church or the church or any small organization can solve this conflict. This is a huge inter-country conflict that is between two nations, the nation of Southern Cameroon and that of La République du Cameroon. We need third party that is powerful to stand on. We also heard from our guests that they are very much aware that France is involved, the role of France in this conflict. And this is something that Ambazonians, the international community, is following. And France is under high international pressure themselves because everyone is pointing fingers to them. Even the United States Senate exclusively mentioned France, the role of France in this conflict. And that is something that every organization is doing. And French government is only a matter of time. They are going to back out of Cameroon. They are going to bail out, and Cameroon will be left alone to face themselves. And justice is coming. Cameroon government is claiming, and they are thinking right now that they have some protection. Atangan Jipo and all the generals and all the governors, they are thinking today that they have some protection. But tomorrow, just like the Merma people, their so-called protection will disappear, and they will be left to face justice for their crimes against humanity in Ambazonia. And the Ambazonian people, we must face this solution and make sure that we fight and fight to the end. We must fight and push the struggle to the end. You can look there, you can see how our people are being killed. There are mass graves of our people being buried every day, day in, day out. And we cannot give up. If you give up, then nobody is going to fight for you. You have to fight. We are actually an endangered species. We must fight to protect our right to life. We must fight to protect our right to self-determination. And that is what is going to take. The Americans fought to make what we call the United States of America. Even Finland fought for their freedom. The Germans, they fought. The French people fought to free themselves from the Nazis Germany. And Ambazonian people, we are going to do the same, but nothing different. We are going to do the same. We are going to fight. There will be no angels from heaven coming to save us. There will be only fighters on ground zero. General Arike, General Efang. There will be leaders like Dr. Abacho Lucas. We have leaders like Dr. Fontaine Niba. We have leaders like Siseko Ayotabe. We have leaders from Ambazonians. People, you and I, we are the generation that is needed to free Ambazonia. There will be no other generation coming from anywhere. There will be no help coming from any place. We have what is needed to finish this struggle. We have it, Ambazonians. We have it. We have the strength. We have the resources. We have the money. Ambazonians can dip their hands into the pocket, and we can buy enough sufficient weapons to crush down Cameroon. But our people, we need to organize ourselves. We need to regroup ourselves. We need to develop a new consciousness of Ambazonia, a new Ambazonianness consciousness, that we come together as a people and work to push this struggle to the finish line. I think next week, Saturday, I'll be having another live show here. I'll be talking with Dr. Carson, Professor Carson Anyangwe, and we are going to look at historical accounts of this struggle and push forward to what is needed to be done for the future so that we can get to where as soon as possible. Fellow Southern Cameroonians, we are going to continue to keep you guys updated. We shall bring also very different guests from different organizations on this program. So stay tuned and keep watching. This is a fantastic platform. I thank also the entire crew of the Ambazonian Communication Network that they are helping us to bring these live shows to you guys, and also on their satellite TV. We applaud their effort. Also, we applaud those from the SCBC as well who are broadcasting this live show right now also on their Facebook platform so that our message can go through to Ground Zero. Again, we are saying that next Saturday we have a live show here with Professor Carson Anyangwe. Make sure you are there to get historical account and some legal arguments that are very, very pertinent when we talk about the struggle to free Southern Cameroon, the Chronicles of Ambazonia. I'll be here with Professor Carson Anyangwe next week, Saturday. We must focus on what is important. Don't go on the noise, Ambazonian. Don't deceive yourself. Don't let even Cameroon play with your emotions or use religion to deceive you. No. The Catholic Church, like I said a couple of days ago, they fought against the American freedom. They fought against the United States of America. The Catholic Church. They fought to defend the Confederation of America. They fought and defend what we call today the KKK, that were responsible to enslave Africans. And today, you don't have to go and trust the same Catholic Church that didn't even support freedom in America. Ambazonians, we are smart. We need to see these things. We need to look at the track record of Catholic Church, even in Africa as well. What are they doing in Africa? We know of the histories and the scandals of their own missionaries in the African continent, the exploitation. So they are only there to defend their interests and to keep you enslaved and in chains to Mr. Paauwe. Ambazonians, these are the last chapter of Cameroon occupation in Southern Cameroons. And we must understand this, Ambazonians. We are not yet using even up to 40% of our strength. We are not. We are functioning now. We have been using like 10% of the strength of Southern Cameroon to fight Paauwe in 4 years. Think about what is going to happen if Ambazonians come on board 100% in a collaborative way of working. And with huge financial resources, we are going to flush Cameroon out like nothing. We are functioning now with 10% of the Ambazonian strength. We need to revamp our energy, mobilize our community so that we can get up to 50%. We can climb up to 100% and deliver this freedom for the people of Southern Cameroons. Fellow Ambazonians, I can stay and I can preach this thing to you people without ending. But we must be able to apply these messages. When you get this information, make use of them. Make use of them. We are not giving this information for live show, for popularity contest. No, we want you to make use of them. So if you're on Ground Zero, you have to be vigilant. You have to play your part. Our community must protect our soldiers on the ground at all times. You have to play your part. So, Ambazonians, next week, Saturday, I'll be here with Professor Carson Anyangwe. And on the next episode of Diplomatic Valise, I'll be bringing you also a very high-level guest. And we are going to talk about many things. And hopefully there'll be some progress. And we shall see. And you already see recently, Ambazonians, that when the Vatican envoy left, and they have been briefing the American regime already. And we shall be following up to those stories as things are happening, and we shall make sure the people of Southern Cameroon get first-hand information, the truth and pure information, without any twisting or without any conning. We will make sure, Ambazonians, that you people stay on the light, not in darkness, because that is what is needed to free any nation. So I thank you very much for being here, and I call on you, Ambazonians. I call on you all. Self-defense is the way forward. Self-defense, gunboat diplomacy, we need to intensify our self-defense. We need to do that. You need to support any self-defense movement that you see on the ground. You need to support them. You need to put money on the ground. That is what is going to free Southern Cameroons. Not the talks, not the live shows, not the cry and not the killings, but self-defense. Thank you very much. And until we see you next week, Saturday, stay safe and stay focused. God bless you, Ambazonians. Long live Ambazonia and short live the struggle. Thank you very much and goodbye.
Welcome to ACN, the Liberation TV of Ambazonia.